Today is, of course, Easter Sunday, but can you also tell me what other day it happens to be today?
April Fools.
April Fool's Day. Something that hasn't happened since 1956. And the linking of these two days present an unlikely pairing of conflicting ideas. One involves the greatest truth ever told, salvation that leads to eternal life, and the other involves pranks based on untruth, misrepresentation, which happen to be designed to make one or more people look foolish. And after you've been pranked and made you look foolish, then those folks shout out,
April Fools.
Oh, you can do better than that.
April Fools.
Church is over, you can go home. Let's see if you're paying attention. Thank you very much. Raise your hand if you've ever been pranked, whether on April Fool's Day or another day. Yeah, we all have. How did that experience make you feel? Can I hear voices?
Foolish.
Foolish, thank you very much. Silly, embarrassed. I've been pranked several times, and the one I really remember is I was a senior in high school, and we'd gone water skiing, and it was hot. We got back to the cabin, and one of the guys offered me a drink, saying it was iced tea, and I was so thirsty and so hot, I just gulped it, not realizing, because the prank was on me, it was grease. Not a very nice prank. I was not very happy, but I sure felt foolish. There is, for your information, a website entitled The Top 100 April Fool's Hoaxes of All Time. And at the top of this list is one that the British Broadcasting Company did, known as the BBC, back in the late 50s. They presented a short documentary showing, purportedly, Swiss farmers harvesting spaghetti in what was called the Swiss spaghetti harvest. And wouldn't you know what happens? And immediately afterwards, the switchboard of the BBC was flooded for calls. How do I get this spaghetti plant? Only they had to, the next day, admit that it had been a hoax. Switching gears now, let's focus on Easter. Easter, the holiest day of the year, has its fools, although not because of an untruth or misrepresentation. And this morning, we're going to look at a few of them. First is Annas. He was the real high priest. Caiaphas was the priest in name, but his father, Annas, was the power behind the high priest role. He's the first fool that comes to my mind. In the drama of Passion Week, he is a Darth Vader-like figure of evil. He is not a nice man. He wants to put Jesus to death because Jesus is a threat to him and all that he and his followers stand for. He is therefore unable to see Jesus for who he really is, the Messiah, the Holy One, the Anointed One of God. And so he begins to pull strings on Jesus' crucifixion. He uses an informer among the disciples to spy on Jesus, and later then pays him 30 pieces of silver to betray him into the religious police hands. And Ananias then arranges for an illegal trial at night, and sees to it that false witnesses testify against Jesus to condemn him to death. He carries out his deception and continues pulling strings on Friday morning, and he plays the Roman governor Pontius Pilate like a fiddler in a bluegrass band. He happens to know that if anyone in the Roman Empire claims to be a king, and he's not the Emperor Caesar, he's condemned to death. So he goes to Pilate, and Pilate is examining Jesus and having a hard time convicting him, and in effect tells him that if you don't convict Jesus and have him executed, I'm going to tell the emperor. Implicit then in this threat is that Pilate will lose his job. But now it's Easter morning, and Jesus is risen. Sorry, Annas, April Fools. Pilate may be the next fool, in spite of his wife begging him not to crucify Jesus because of a terrible dream she's just had. Pilate gives in. He turns coward and does what Annas wants. He orders Jesus to be crucified on the cross, and then publicly makes a demonstration of washing his hands, symbolically saying, I have no responsibility for what has just happened. But now it's Easter morning, and Jesus is risen. Say it with me.
April Fools, Pilate.
Next, the disciples might be considered fools. They had given up their jobs and their families to follow Jesus for 3 years up and down Israel. They had witnessed these wonderful, unbelievable miracles that he had performed, and they had pinned their hopes and their very futures, believing that Jesus would overthrow the Romans and would establish a new government, and they would receive high positions in that new government. But instead he'd been led to the lamb to slaughter. And they had gone into hiding for fear that they would be next on the cross. Join me, please. But now it's Easter morning, and Jesus is risen.
April Fool's disciples.
And just maybe, as followers of Jesus who love him and follow his teachings, we may be April Fools. Think about it. Undeniably, much of the world thinks we are. After all, think about this. We stake our eternal souls on someone whose divine origin we can't explain, who is not physically present to see, to touch, or to audibly communicate with, who promises a resurrection after our physical death, and promises to come again at an unknown time to lead us to a future whose origin we cannot now determine. Perhaps we are April Fools. But join me. Now, friends, it's Easter morning, and Jesus is risen.
April Fool's world.
You see, what the world failed to understand then and fails to understand now is that God does not operate according to the way we think or act. The Old Testament prophet Isaiah 2,700 years ago reminds us that God's thoughts are not our thoughts, nor are our ways God's ways. And then, 700 years after that, along comes Paul. Along comes Paul. Excuse me a minute. I got to page 4 before I got to page 3. And here's what the Apostle Paul said in his first letter to the church in Corinth. God made foolish the wisdom of the world. The foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom. Now here's what the Jews thought. According to the Jews, Jesus couldn't possibly have been the expected Messiah because in their human wisdom, they mistakenly thought that he was born in the wrong town. He claimed to be divine, but they knew he had an earthly mother. He broke Jewish law by healing on the Sabbath and hanging out with the unclean sinners. Instead of an eye for an eye, he taught love and forgiveness for everybody, even including one's enemies. He offered salvation to everyone, not just to the Jews. He said that to be first, one had to be last, and finally he died on a tree, contrary to Scripture. Jesus, they concluded in their wisdom, was a revolutionary deserving death, not the long hoped for Messiah. But what I want to remind you this morning is that believing in God is not a matter of wisdom or intelligence. It is a matter of faith.
Amen.
Paul puts it this way in that first letter to the Corinthians. God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached, and that was Christ not only crucified, but resurrected to save those who believe. And we know today that Jesus Christ is alive, and he sits on the right hand of the throne of God. And out of love for us, he willingly gave up his place in heaven to die on an earthly cross to save us from our sin that leads to eternal death. It may be foolishness to the world, but Scripture promises a day is coming that when everyone, both those who believe and those who don't, then and now, in heaven, on earth, and even under the earth, will bow what? Well, come on, you can read it. Bow their knee and confess that Jesus Christ is Lord to the glory of God the Father.
Amen.
In the meantime, let me suggest as we wait for that second coming that we live as holy fools for Christ. Theologian Robert Rohr says this about being a holy fool. When you're a holy fool for Christ, You have stopped trying to look like something more than you really are. That's when you know we do not need to pretend that we are better than we are. I am who I am, and that creation, who I am, for some unbelievable reason, is who God loves. My deepest freedom, he goes on to say, comes from God's infinite love for me, not from what people think or say about me.
Amen.
Well, then how do we live as holy fools for Jesus? We can begin this morning joining together in a reaffirmation. I know we've done an affirmation, but now we're going to do a reaffirmation. I'm going to ask you to join in it. And we are going to reaffirm what we believe is holy fools. Join me, please.
Lord Jesus, many people might not think it's the smartest thing in the world to follow you. In fact, they may think I'm crazy, and that you yourself were something like a lunatic while on earth. But I am just enough of a holy fool to believe that you pulled it off, conquered death, and brought life and light to a darkened world. So I recommit my life to you and seek support in this company of fools called the church. Amen.
Then next, what we do. Well, let me suggest that you spend every day making church of her by your activities in the world. And think back to that first affirmation of faith about what you said you would do as a reminder. To seek peace, care for sick, clothe the naked, feed the hungry, empower the oppressed, and welcome the outcast to carry on Christ's work until he comes. That's your commitment. You don't get a one-way ticket to heaven by sitting on your hands. You are to live out your faith in the world, to make your faith real for others. And finally, in the words of that chorus to the old Gaither song, go out into the world knowing that because Jesus lives, you can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. And because you know who holds the future, life is worth the living because he lives. And now we're going to sing those words.
I can face tomorrow because he lives. All fear is gone because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives.
Let's do that one more time.
Because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Because he lives, all fear is gone. Because I know he holds the future, and life is worth the living just because he lives.
Somebody needs to say amen.
Amen.
We come now to a time